Welcome back, everybody. I'm Margaret O'Gorman. I'm the president of Wildlife Habitat Council. And thank you for joining us here for our panel session, which I'm pleased to be moderating. I hope you're enjoying the virtual conference so far, especially this morning's panel with the inspiring work of Tina Claffey. In case you missed it, be sure to catch the recorded session, which will be available in the event app, where you can watch it at any time. It's one of the most visual sessions we've had, so it will be very worthwhile to watch it if you have not done so. But at this panel, I'm going to be pivoting from the beauty of the peatlands to the global stage. And we're going to be talking about how the business community can put nature at the center this year, and how we who work in business and at the intersection of business and biodiversity can all advocate for nature. WHC's membership is a truly global one. We have companies headquartered in Asia, Europe, and the USA among our members. Our membership combined has annual revenues of almost $2 trillion, with employees and operations in communities across the world. And at this conference, we have representatives from companies from 17 countries and from sectors as diverse as mining, manufacturing, energy, and tech. And we have a total of 138 different entities that include the private sector companies, but also government agencies, nonprofits, and education institutes here at this meeting. So with this diverse collection, the one thing we all have in common is a connection to nature and being proactive to secure a vibrant planet with species as small and special as the sundews from Tina's presentation, and the habitats and ecosystems that we'll be honoring in our awards program later today. And being proactive for nature is synonymous with being an advocate for nature. And this is what we're going to explore in the panel today: how we can advocate for nature and how we should advocate for nature. We have a great panel of experts to talk through this subject, from what's happening on the global stage this year to what can happen at a corporate operation. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now, and then each panelist will talk, after my introductions, will give a brief commentary of their approach to this subject. So Naomi Cooper is the head of sustainability at CRH, the leading global diversified building materials business in the world. CRH is a member of WHC. It employs 76,600 people at 3,100 locations worldwide. So welcome, Naomi. It's great to have you here. Bill Sisson is the Executive Director of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, North America. WBCSD is a global CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. It's lovely that you can join us today, Bill.
Thanks, Margaret.
And Eva Zabey is the Executive Director of Business for Nature. Business for Nature is a global coalition that brings together business and conservation organizations and forward-thinking companies. And I'm proud to say that WHC is a partner in Business for Nature. As our WHC members, well, they're not partners, but they participate in Business for Nature. WHC members BASF, Bayer, Bridgestone, Cemex, CRH, and Waste Management. I may have forgotten some, but very welcome to you, Eva. So it's great to have everyone here today. We're going to start with quick presentations from each of our panelists to get a general understanding of the work they are doing, connecting the dots between corporate, community, and conservation interests. So I'm going to turn it over now to Eva.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Margaret. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you today. So I'm Eva, and as Margaret said, I lead Business for Nature, which is this global coalition driving business leadership that aims to then give policymakers the courage and comfort to make ambitious agreements on nature. So I'll be talking quite a bit about the global landscape. You may have heard of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, one of the sister conventions to the Climate Convention. And later this year, all of the governments as part of that convention will be adopting, hopefully, a new framework, the equivalent of the Paris Agreement on climate from 2015. So this is really important for businesses because businesses need that long-term certainty to invest, to innovate, to shift their business models, And that regulatory framework dictates the level playing field and the operating environment for companies to then compete, not only on their financial performance, but on their environmental and social performance too.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for that introduction. I'm not sure how many people on this call know about Business for Nature, so I think it'll be interesting for them to learn more as they go forward. And I think next on the list is, sorry, my computer is just messing up a little bit here, is Bill. So Bill, would you like to give us an introduction as to the work that you're doing?
Sure. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development is an organization that was stood up now 26 years ago to really bring the voice of business leadership into the discussions that at the time were very focused on climate and the climate challenges that we faced, but more and more as we've expanded our understanding of sustainability, of course, that adopts the now relevant context of environmental, social, and governance aspects. WBCSD is front and center in the business-led elements of those topics. The organization itself really exists because of our members. Our members come to us to lead, to understand, to share knowledge, and also to bring that information back to adapt their business models around the context of climate change, the natural systems that they interact with, now more increasingly addressing inequality aspects and human right aspects, and to be fully transparent associated with the work they do in this space. So the organization looks to be very much a part of, and in some cases even the initiator of topics that are relevant. And I think Business for Nature, I'll let Eva talk a little bit about the formation of Business for Nature, but it certainly manifested itself from the WBCSD's interest to expand our understanding in the business voice for nature. I'll pause there and we'll come back to some other aspects of WBCSD shortly.
Great, thank you, Bill. And Naomi, tell us about CRH and the work that you've been doing in this area of nature.
Yeah, thanks very much, Margaret, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with everyone today. I say for CRH, as one of the leading global building materials companies, we rely on natural resources to provide those products to our customers that are essential for modern life. You know, the roads we drive on, the infrastructure that brings our services to us, the houses that we live and work in. So sustainability is hugely important to CRH, not only in terms of our how we produce our products, but also in terms of how our products perform along their whole life cycle. So we've had a long time had a focus on protecting and enhancing biodiversity at our own sites. You know, there's a real opportunity sometimes in the landscapes that exist today to provide those kind of habitats around extractive locations, margins and so on. And, you know, wildlife-led design features such as providing structures for nesting and so on. But more recently, I think our philosophy has moved on to embrace this idea of promoting a culture of appreciation and respect for biodiversity. So in practice, I think that means this kind of advocacy that we're speaking about today. It's how we work with our customers to bring nature into urban spaces through green roofs, green walls, paving with planting pockets and so on. It's working with developers to specify and design nature-based solutions for, say, stormwater runoff solutions. And it's also linking together projects at our sites with broader biodiversity goals, maybe creating wildlife corridors or creating habitats to really help deal with that fragmentation, that issue that's so common everywhere. So that's the way we're looking at this now. It's how we play our part as a leading company in a systems level in promoting the interests of nature.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. And we have been working with CRH for many, many years. And we really use CRH as an example of a company who has a very thoughtful approach to its biodiversity work and its operations. So it's not a surprise to me that you also are having this thoughtful approach as how to bring a respect for biodiversity out across your supply chain and your customer chain and into where you're having an impact. So I hope to hear more about that in a moment as we delve into it. But I'm just going to flip back to Eva, because she said something about how Business for Nature is about, and I thought it's an interesting phrase, which is you give companies the courage and comfort to act for nature. Can you expand a little bit on that?
For sure. And I think the starting point is nature is at a tipping point. Scientists are telling us we have 10 years to get our act together. So this is no longer a question of can we, should we must. But then the question is, how fast can we transform our systems, the systems in which companies operate, whether it's the regulatory rules of the game or the financial and economic rules of the game or their internal management rules of the game within the companies. And so what we found at Business for Nature last year, we did a bit of an assessment. We know that companies are already making commitments, taking action. In terms of commitments, at least 500. In terms of action, at least 1,200 companies are already taking action in some form to help reverse nature loss. The message there is it's fragmented, and together it is certainly not enough. So how do we scale and speed that up? One of the strongest levers for change is going to be that policy ambition, which in turn will drive even more business action on the ground. This isn't about pointing fingers or a blame game of saying, oh, corporate should be doing this and governments should be doing this and consumers need to change their practices. We all have that responsibility in how we spend our time, how we spend our money, who we vote for, etc. So I think there is a shared accountability in the system. So that's the framing. Now, what is very interesting is how do we go from companies taking action to then the next step of advocating? And at Business for Nature, we've simplified, working with all of our partners, to simplify into 4 steps that all companies should take. This first one, which is practically under the ground, is assess. Assess your most material impacts and dependencies and focus on them. So there are lots of tools out there. Once you know that, then you can commit to ambitious targets using science-based information through the Science-Based Targets for Nature Network, and then act. And that's what Naomi was already talking about. It's not only about the avoiding and reducing negative impacts, but it's also about restoring, regenerating, and then transforming your business. And then that final one is advocate. So when you start getting into, well, companies should be advocating, what does that actually mean? What is advocacy? In fact, you could say advocacy is any activity by an individual or a group that aims to influence decisions within political, economic, or social institutions. And so many of the companies listening on the line are probably already advocating, even if someone in your company is meeting with a government representative, a minister or a head of state. Maybe you've published an op-ed on a specific topic calling for more action in an area. Maybe you participate in a trade association or signed up to a call to action, like Business for Nature's Nature is Everyone's Business call to action that now more than 800 companies have signed up to. I'll pop the link in. So if you haven't signed up, you must sign up. These are all acts of basically saying we are advocating. What Naomi was saying about in cities, green roofs, stormwater management in cities, all of those solutions somehow mean that you need to influence someone to allow those to be acceptable solutions, because they're not always the default option. So anyway, I won't go into a lot of more detail because I know others have to share, but it was just that advocacy can be seen as in a broad suite, and we need companies and that leadership to step up to ask for the change, because policymakers by themselves will be particularly surprised somehow to hear businesses calling for more progressive action and ambition on nature. This is, something that businesses can really help tip the discussion in the right direction by giving not only the courage and comfort to the companies themselves, but to the policymakers, that there is support for these key changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Eva. And that the courage and comfort is a great statement to have as you are talking to companies about leading advocacy for nature. And I think another word will be collaboration. And I'm going to get back to Naomi on the collaboration effort. But when you talk about allowing companies to lead, Bill, you've said WBCSD is a company CEO led. You follow what the companies are asking you to do. And are you seeing more leadership around nature and around biodiversity question in recent years with the companies that participate with you?
Yeah, let me touch on that a little bit. In my introduction, I said that there are really four imperatives for business, and our members really focus on these with us. First is obviously around the climate urgency and the climate emergency we're facing, but also an increasing number of our business voices and business leaders are asking for more work on the nature issues, whether it's biodiversity loss or how do we address a better use of land and associated natural impacts in that context, and the inequality piece. So in 2020, we recognized to be a leading voice for business in these topic areas, we need to ask our business leaders to accept more responsibility and accountability in these areas. We've always had member conditions at WBCSD, but we took a look at our member conditions and realized they weren't precise enough or granular enough to really understand what companies needed to do in these key areas I just outlined. So last year, together with our members, and this was not imposed on them, it was a process we used to understand what the right language needed to be, the terminology. We introduced 5 new member criteria. The first was obviously around climate, and all our members are being asked to set ambitions for net zero emissions by 2050 with a science-based approach. But interestingly enough, the second criteria we introduced was around the nature agenda. And I'll read it specifically. It's to set ambitious, science-informed, short and mid-term environmental goals that contribute to nature biodiversity recovery by 2050. Now, there's a lot of conversations going on around what matters, what doesn't, because at the end of the day, our members want to be measured for the work they do. And our view is that by measuring effectively our company's performance in these areas, they'll be rewarded by the financial markets for their leadership in these topics. So we're working through the precision of some of these new criteria together with our members, but I thought it was important for your audience to know, as an organization, we asked our leading companies to step up and adhere to these conditions and drive that agenda through their C-suite down into how the organization attempts to do that through all of its integrated functions. And I point to Naomi because I know you're going to go to her next. CRH is a very active and important member at WBCSD and is adhering to these conditions as we go forward. So many of our member companies are now looking at what they need to do to adapt their strategies around these 5 criteria. I know I only talked about 2. The other 2 are addressing inequality, adopting the UN guiding principles for human rights, and looking at a more effective disclosure approach using the Task Force for Financially Related Climate Disclosure, as well as to incorporate ESG risk elements into their enterprise risk management framework. I can share more details on that offline with anyone that wants to know more, but that kind of rounds out my response.
Sure, Bill, thank you so much. And I think I, for one, am heartened that that nature has become part of the CEO-driven agenda. For many years, we've been talking about how much it's been lagging and connecting. We've almost had to connect from the operation up to the C-suite rather than the C-suite down. So it's really nice to see that the C-suite is now driving that. And Naomi, you've kind of seen that too at CRH. Certainly the CRH efforts that happen in the USA have a strong connection between leadership at CRH and the actual operations. And that is by design. That is something that has been designed in the efforts at CRH in the USA for many, many years. And do you see the same things happening across your company, across the rest of the countries in which you work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, biodiversity as an issue has definitely come up the rankings in recent years. And I think personally, over the course of the pandemic, I think people really realized how much that connection to nature is hugely important for, you know, our core well-being. And we've been seeing, I think it's accelerated that trend that we've been seeing in recent years anyway, but we see more and more stakeholders when we go and engage with them, that they want to know about how does CRH as a company think about biodiversity. You know, people really, I think, are looking at the possibility of a future where the financial system is more supportive of those nature goals and achieving those goals around reversing nature loss. And I think, like, we see that now in the investors that we speak to. We're starting to see some in our investor dialogue, some discussions of biodiversity. We're starting to see really, you know, the sustainability and environmental social governance issues in general are more and more part of our mainstream discussions, and biodiversity absolutely is part of those discussions. But it's as it moves on, it becomes a much more complex topic. And that's why I think the whole collaboration place is so important. As I think Eva put it so well, you know, no one company can solve this by themselves. You know, even when you take local issues and you start looking at them on a global level, I mean, biodiversity is a local issue, but it has global implications and it has to be looked at globally. But how do you measure it? How do you know, are you achieving your goals for that site? How can you dissolve that into some key performance indicators that can be readily understood by a broader and broader and broader range of stakeholders, some of whom aren't specialists in a topic and aren't familiar really with what good looks like? You know, just the scope for greenwashing then can come in very, very, very quickly. And I think that's where initiatives such as Bill spoke about and Eva's been speaking about are so important in just getting that level playing field so that people know what they're talking about and are all speaking the same language. And then eventually we keep our focus on the bigger goal, which is around protecting the biodiversity we have, enhancing that and reversing these generations of species loss that we've been looking at. I mean, there was the research that came out earlier this year, and probably everyone in this call would have seen it, about how only 3% of our land ecosystems are in their intact state. And that shocked me. So I think that need for that collaboration to kind of solve those big problems. But also, you know, it's something we care about, I think, on an individual basis. It's not just something that's being driven by stakeholders and so on. So I think it's really important that everyone collaborates towards that bigger goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Naomi, I mean, that 3% statistic is very depressing, but also what you said there about how individually we care, globally we care, and it's again, how do we join all of those dots to make that caring into something that has momentum? And I think the collaborative effort is certainly somewhere where companies can get courage and comfort because you're not all doing it together. And I think that's just a really interesting approach for the Business for Nature, but also, Naomi, with the Global Concrete and Cement Association, you guys are developing biodiversity best practices for the industry as a whole, to allow no company, to ensure that no company has to take that first step out there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we were really proud of that. Last year, the Global Cement and Concrete Association launched its new biodiversity guidelines for all of its member companies, and we played a part in helping to develop those, but also our CEO was the president of that association when the guidelines were launched. So yeah, I think it's like you say, it's all those small actions. I mean, with yourselves and the Wildlife Habitat Council in North America now, we have over 3,000 acres certified within the Wildlife Habitat Council certification schemes. So each project is bringing employees, it's bringing local communities, it's bringing the company together to look at these bigger issues. So yeah, it's yeah, hugely important to be playing our part there.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And Eva, when you see a company like CRH, but other companies that are signing on to the call to action, what are the drivers that you're seeing? Are there common drivers? Are they financial purely? Are they social license to operate drivers? Why are companies signing on to the call to action? And certainly I hope that I think you did put the link in. So anybody who's on this call, as I said, we have a large number of representatives from companies and countries. So please, if you're not signed on to the call for action, think about how you can elevate it. But Eva, what are you seeing as the drivers from leadership, from corporate leadership to actually sign on?
So it's a good question, and I will answer it, but I would also, in a way, bounce back from what Naomi and other companies are saying and doing. I think companies right now, I mean, first of all, there's no answer for all companies generally, but business is a very diverse set, and it depends how material and how obviously directly dependent your company is, or in which geography and regulatory environment you operate. But the headline is that I think most companies start looking at the risk element, and that there are operational risks. If you run out of a material, there are physical risks if your operations get, flooded by a storm. If there are financial risks if you don't, secure the capital that you need. There are reputational risks if your customers basically start boycotting. So there are different risks, and in fact, the World Economic Forum earlier this year carried out published a really important and influential report, Nature Risk Rising it's called, which basically states that over half of the world's GDP is at moderate or high risk due to nature loss. And that's an alarm bell of saying, okay, guys, so we're just chugging along nicely, benefiting from all the ecosystem services that we're taking for granted. At some point, we will lose those, and they are already being lost at an alarming rate, and that will have pure economic consequences for your company. So I think but there's also the opportunity side. And again, the forum came out with another report on the future of a nature positive economy, stating that nearly 400 million jobs and $10 trillion of economic opportunity could be generated by 2030. So companies will enter at it either they're managing their risk, or they're thinking about future opportunities. They understand the regulatory environment is going to change. But I guess what I'm reflecting on listening to this, and being part of this conversation is we've got to really be honest with ourselves that these specific company, site location, even sector approaches collectively is a bit more business as usual. It's basically what we've been doing in sustainability for the past decades. We have to challenge ourselves now and say, how can we change the system so that, in fact, you raise the bar, but not just as a change or a transition, but as a transformation. We need to challenge ourselves when we're in these industry groups and working with other partners. This is not about your own institutional reputation as being the best business organization to go to. It cannot be about that. We need to leave our institutional hats aside, and not before starting to develop a new methodology, make sure that we are really and truly collaborating with existing methodologies that have already been developed and building on them. Because what's happening now is we have we've basically got such a duplication and such confusion in the landscape that most companies, when they come to Business for Nature, they say, we are overwhelmed with too much information. It's not that we cannot find it, we find too much of it, and now we don't know what to do. So I think we should take a responsibility, and that is reflected in the whole ESG conversation as well, on environmental, social, and governance issues and criteria. We cannot make it a taboo that actually there is an issue with ESG metrics, and it is an issue that different companies and performance is rating in different ways. But we need to say to ourselves, that's a good thing. Right now, it is all a good thing that there are so many initiatives, that there are so many methodologies, and there are so many different ways, because it means that we have reached that famous tipping point, and now we're in the convergence space. Sorry to be a bit provocative, but I think it's really important to raise those points and to challenge ourselves even further.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Eva. I think it's good to be provocative, and certainly, like you, I share some frustration around the plethora of platforms and which kind of sometimes is used as the absence for forward movement in some ways. And for us at WHC, it's the metrics question that we struggle with, because we see a lot of refusal to move because the ideal metric has not yet been produced, and the ideal metric is never going to be produced, so we end up in that kind of loop. So I agree with a lot of what, I agree with everything that you're saying there. So please continue.
And Margaret, can I just say, I'm sorry, I just want to say one thing that I would like to commend CRH on all of the efforts. This was not at all in any way intended to be. I could criticize Bill and everyone else, I mean, and Business for Nature ourselves, because we're all in this. Basically, it's one of those classic things of don't be annoyed you're in a traffic jam, you are the traffic jam. Don't be annoyed we're in this situation. We are part of the sustainability issue, see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting to me because the extractive industries have been at the forefront of a lot of the conversations because they've had to be. And I think of some of the other industries can actually learn from the extractive industries, in particularly in what has failed, what hasn't worked, because I feel that there's a lot of reinventing the wheel of things that the extractives have tried and have not seemed to be successful, where some of the approaches that they have taken have been successful. But certainly, yes, there is transformative change needed. And I think I'll just pop to Bill on that. Like, where does WBCSD see its role in, because, you know, you, like us, have been around for a long time. You're so much bigger than WHC is, but where do you see the transformative ability, or the ability for WBCSD to be transformative in the framework that Eva is talking about?
It's a great question, and let me take a stab at something I think that's become increasingly important for all our member companies. And Naomi touched on this in her comments about being inquired by the investment community on what CRH is doing around biodiversity. Think about that. Investors are asking a corporate, publicly traded company what they're doing about biodiversity. Why is that happening? What's the underlying reason for this? And Eva touched on it with risk. There's a risk to business and longevity and long-term performance, and the investor community is starting to realize that ESG as a parameter space for evaluating the future value of companies is an important ingredient. And so that's the dynamic we're now starting to really understand at WBCSD. I've been in sustainability now coming up on 20 years. And I used to always think, as a sustainability professional, and all the door knocking and door slamming I experienced in those early days of trying to tell the company this was an important thing beyond just how we communicate it, I thought when it started to become an issue for our chief financial officer, then the rules of the game were going to change. That's the period we're living in now, and we're adapting to that context. We've got, I won't say we've got climate figured out, because we don't, but we're well advanced on how we've positioned the context of information clarity, information standardization. We're driving that issue as an organization with our members. But nature is on the frontier, and I'd like to just make a statement, because I've only learned about this recently, that tomorrow there will be the launch of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. I'm happy to post the link of the launch announcement for your participants today. But this is really an important step for the issue we're talking about today, because it's going to create the framework for companies across different sectors to report and act on nature and the related risks associated with that to their business. The consumers of that information are the very investors that Naomi's referring to, but it's going to be across all the business sectors that are represented in this, whether it's extractives, whether it's built environment, whether it's those companies that touch food, land, and oceans. It's going to cross all those parameter spaces and really set the bar for what companies should report, how to report, and how to relate that back to the risks they report. That's the work we're a part of, and frankly, that's the important part of the work we need to continue forward. is how do we position the companies that are doing real leading work in these areas to the investors in a way that they understand, and then can then value those companies in ways that improve the performance of those companies. Back to you.
Yeah, Bill, thank you very much. And I think that is a really interesting evolution. When WHC, when we engage with companies to do strategic planning for corporate conservation, 10 years ago, it would have been the EHS guys were in the room. 5 years ago, it would have been the sustainability guys came in with the EHS people. Today, we're seeing the shareholder relationship people in the room for strategy building for corporate conservation. And that is new. The other thing we're seeing is human resources, which is also great because they're thinking about employee engagement. But increasingly, we are seeing people from the finance office where we had never seen them before. And that's certainly a reflection of what you were just saying there. And I think it's a great evolution, because when we look at the basically the failure of, in many ways, the equatorial lending principles and performance standard 6, which is basically an off-ramp to, to offsets, rather than thinking about the mitigation hierarchy in a better way when it came to biodiversity, to be thinking about how the financial world can take a stronger position in pushing those activities. I think it's a really great transformational thing that we need to be looking at. So thank you for talking about the investor community. And I'm not sure, Naomi, how much more you can kind of talk about how you're seeing that change at CRH and the questions that they're asking when you're developing your goals, your ambitions, and also your reports on that issue.
Yeah, and I think William Britt drew a very clear line between the climate debate and this biodiversity debate. And I think what we're starting to see more and more is people are aiming to assess everything on a wider system basis, because we know that keeping ecosystems intact is helpful in the climate debate, it's helpful in the water debate, it's helpful sometimes in an inclusion debate. So it's all of these things are so connected. And similarly, you'd see how something like recycled materials or using alternative materials is so connected to resource efficiency, keeping resources in the ground, and the climate issue. So everything is so connected, and I think people are now trying to really think about these issues in the whole, and really think about how this relates to those big trends that are driving businesses to change at the minute. So something like increasing urbanization, increasing populations. How is the business going to function in the future when these are the trends? And I think just this connection that people have now to nature, to the environment, is it's something that people are bringing more and more into their everyday life. And if you're an investor, you bring it into your everyday life in that way, and people are thinking about things in a more holistic manner, I think, than perhaps people thought about issues in the past. If you go back to when I started in CRH first 16 years ago, we were starting to produce our sustainability report. This was a starting of an engagement with our external and internal stakeholders. But now it has moved on so much more, and every single stakeholder group that any business has got an opinion and really, really deeply cares about these much broader environmental, social, and governance issues than perhaps they may have had in the past. I think people want to know that a corporate is looking around itself, seeing where it fits into the world in the future as that world changes. And I mean, any change, any transformation is going to bring risks, but it's also bringing opportunities. So I think our investors are very aware that there's a financial benefit for CRH for looking after biodiversity, both from a compliance point of view in terms of meeting our obligations at our sites, but also from an opportunity point of view in terms of some of the new types of products that I mentioned. So there's that element of it, but I think that reputational piece is hugely important as well. I mean, people want to invest in companies that are doing the right thing. People want to work for companies that are doing the right thing. People want to buy from companies that are doing the right thing. So investors, employees, customers, people are very aware of, their own actions and how they relate then, indirectly as well through the companies that they do business with. So you couldn't ignore that reputational element of it, as well as the financial elements. So yeah, hugely important. And I mean, that's why we would have added our voice to the Business for Nature campaign. I mean, nature is everyone's business is a statement that nobody could possibly disagree with. And it just helps us show leadership, and really importantly, show commitment to the whole area. So I really value that ability to just join together with others and have that voice heard.
Yeah. So Naomi, it's a really great point. She just said nature is everybody's business. How can anybody argue with that? But some people have argued with that, right? Even some companies have said, no, it's not our business. We're not signing on to the call to action. And what was the drivers there?
Well, a really small number of companies first had to be convinced, because they were so far ahead that for them, they were like, well, why would we even sign up? Because it's just so obvious. And I said, I don't know, sign up. Because if you don't sign up and then someone asks, why didn't you sign up? Don't you believe that? Oh yeah, okay, we'll just, it's a very quick, 30-second decision. Some companies a few companies, probably got stuck in maybe even their legal departments. It is possible that it got through, and suddenly you're saying, okay, so you're saying that governments must adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. And that is something that is maybe a big question for business processes, basically, because if the level of the call to action, which is so headline, which major companies around the world from all sectors, from all countries have already signed up to and had no problem with their internal legal departments, then maybe it's a question for your own company, I guess, to see, is that going to be a blocker in many other ways? But I should say that regardless of those small, that they're just a handful of examples. Mostly companies have been really pleased and happy to add their voice to the growing momentum of companies. Then, yeah, I think on the whole, it is a bit of a no-brainer. And the only reason why a company may not have already signed up is simply they didn't know about it yet, or just in the priority list, it just hasn't popped up, in the task list. So watch out, because we're getting up to 1,000, and maybe we'll do something special for the 1,000th company to sign up. So that's just to put the pressure on.
Thank you, Eva. And we say at WHC, if it has to go through legal, let's find another way to get it done. Because the company, that tends to be one of the biggest roadblocks that we have. But Bill, thank you for remarking about the Task Force for Nature-Based Disclosure. I can never get that one right. I know I'm certainly signed up to visit that tomorrow and to see what's happening. But from what I can see, the timeline on that is very, very long. And as Eva started, we have 10 years to sort ourselves out when it comes to nature. And TFND, or whatever the acronym is right now, it seemed to be something like a 5-year, or maybe I'm looking at it wrong, endeavor. Eva's shaking her head. She said it's much shorter than that, but it just seemed very long to me. Either Bill or Eva, do you want to kind of comment on that?
Well, Eva, go first, and then I'll follow up.
Happy to. So no, the TNFD, Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, I've been practicing, Margaret. I've been practicing. They've committed to delivering a framework for the disclosures in 2023. So it is a couple of years away, but it will be seen as a generally accepted reference, and that will be an important step. What I would like to add in the build up to that is that next year, 2022, we should have the science-based targets for nature methodologies for how companies and then cities can set targets that make sure they're operating within planetary boundaries. So they go, in a way, they do go hand in hand, and there is a build up there. But of course, companies shouldn't use waiting for those as an excuse not to prepare, act, and already anticipate these coming. But Bill, back to you.
Yeah, and thank you, Eva, for providing the clarification on timing. I was going to just comment that WBCSD is a kind of a representative stakeholder group in all of these processes. So it really does allow us to aggregate the voice of our members around driving the agenda. And we're certainly not an organization that wants to see time horizons lengthen. If you know Peter Bakker, our CEO, and you've ever met him or heard him speak, we have no time left. It is time to change now, and we can't wait for some of these things to actually take root, which is why we introduced the member criteria that we did. I also want to make a comment or make an introduction to another piece of our work to your listeners, because it touches this very topic as well. We launched in March something we call our Vision 2050, and it's going to set really the framework of how we as an organization will go forward to tackle these broad issues. I'll just hold up the copy I have on my desk that I keep right by my side these days, but it really frames the essential ingredients of what companies need to do to transform around climate, around nature, and around inequality, and to be fully transparent in their processes. I'll post a link to this because some of your listeners might be interested in this, but we really explore this through what we call 9 pathways. And every pathway has a relevant sector associated with it. For instance, Naomi and CRH would be quite involved with our work in living spaces because of their associative interests in the built environment. But we also touch on the food issues, the energy issues, the challenges around the investment products and the financial services that will come forward. I'll leave it to your readers to take a look, or to your listeners to take a look, but it really does frame around the transformation models that businesses need to start to think about over the next 10 years, frankly, to be ready to move to 2050 with the agenda we have in front of us. I'll post that link for your listeners, and back to you.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And I think there's been an enormous number of resources mentioned in this panel so far. So thank you for everybody who's published the link. And somebody was asking for the Nature Risk Rising link. So if we can find that, that would be great. So thank you for that. And I lost a bit of sound there, so I didn't hear all you said, but I certainly got your Vision 2050, and I'm going to be looking for that. But we have a question in the, from one of our panelists, Jeff. And Jeff this is for the panel for a whole, so I'll start with maybe Naomi on this, and then go to Eva and Bill. The question for the panel is, how can we more effectively convey to senior leadership the critical importance of biodiversity so they truly understand and feel our passion and empathy towards the more than human world? How do we make them get it? And Naomi, if you're comfortable to go first, I'd certainly love to hear your take.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think, you know, the emotional connection that anybody has to some of these issues is very, very real. And at the same time, a lot of the senior leaders are always thinking in the framework of business decisions, what's best for the business as it is over the next year, 5 years, 10 years into the future. So I think you have to hit not only the emotional, moral reasons, but also the business case. And I mean, we've been talking about the business case for this in a few different ways. And I think, like I spoke about, maybe the financial and the reputational benefits were really important for us. Eva mentioned some of the other kind of operational risks and so on that might arise for your business. So I find that when you can translate some of these issues into the direct impact on your own business in the short term, it's a way to get people to really sit up and see how that how it affects business directly.
Thank you, Naomi. Eva, will CEOs feel passion and empathy?
They are humans after all. Yes, they do. No, but just so building quickly on Naomi's, I think if you use the peer pressure competition, even though we're all about collaboration here, competition of, hey, check out what happened to your peers, either something awful happened or something amazing happened and they're doing really well, we need to get on that bandwagon, you're late. So that kind of thing can work. But I think that what I've heard more and more anecdotally, I don't know if there's been there might have even been some research about this. CEOs' children are probably the people who influence them and therefore their business the most. Like they really do play a role of, I cannot believe you're the CEO of a big company and you're acting more on biodiversity, nature, climate, etc. Because typically they'll be coming to that teenager year, early young adults, and they will then be very aware and active. And then I've also heard about experiences of CEOs having a personal experience where they really go on a boat in the middle of an ocean, see the plastic, come back and say, that's it, we're done. We need to change what we're doing. But Phil, I'm sure you have hundreds of examples as well.
I was going to reflect on the question in two ways. One is, if you look over the last 24 months at the number of companies that have come forward with goals that align with the Paris Agreement for climate, I think you will fast see that same response around the nature objectives that come forward, which are in development. So once we understand and have a clear line of sight as to what the 1.5 degree commitment looks like for nature, I think CEOs will rise up. Those leading CEOs will put their voices out, and that will create the pressure on other companies to step up and make the same types of commitments. We saw it with climate. We're going to have to accelerate and see it with nature. So that's kind of one dimension of the response in terms of what will play out. I think the key will be getting those voices heard and putting pressure on the other companies to do the same. But there's another dynamic that will play, and we've already talked about it, and that's the investors themselves. When the investors are going to start pushing C-suite to take materiality into consideration when it comes to nature, there's going to be a serious discussion that happens after the investors walk out of the room. And I just shine a light on something that happened in the last couple of weeks with ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil was pressured ultimately by their shareholders to put 3 seats on the board to take a much more serious look at the role ExxonMobil will play in addressing their ESG program. And I think this will also shine a light on them to attend to the nature issues as well. So pressure is going to come from all sides as this starts to ramp up. And I think increasingly you're going to hear more and more C-suite CEOs, executives step up and take the appropriate action.
Yeah, great, Bill. And that's a great example. ExxonMobil last week, we had ExxonMobil, Shell and Chevron all in the spotlight with respect to large sustainability efforts, which was very interesting. And I have a comment here, which I think reflects maybe WHC a little bit, but we've been hearing about leading companies and multinationals. Are the global efforts at the intersection of business and nature excluding mid-size and small corporations, and as a result setting them up for failure once these frameworks are promoted, adopted, expected? And Bill is shaking his head vigorously, so we will go there first.
I have an opinion on everything, but I'd love to hear Eva's as well, and Naomi's as well. But I think, I think we really come back to the question of who are the customers of the large corporates and who are the suppliers of the large corporates. And so much like we've seen in the flow down of expectations in the climate agenda through scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 elements of our major corporations, the supply chain represents the scope 3 considerations that many of our companies have to consider. So there is a dynamic at play that will manifest itself in the nature space as well. And I think that will be the role we play. I think there certainly is an element of the small medium enterprise that represents that important ingredient for the supply base of our companies. And I think it's just really setting up the right kinds of relationships that need to happen there. There is a company out there, I raise it up, it's a company called EcoVadis, which is really got its arms now around how to rate those smaller companies so that the major companies can start to get a better handle on who's ahead in this space and who's not. And I think you'll see sort of an attention now, increasing attention to the nature elements of how those rating systems will come forward.
Yeah, Bill, thank you. And it's interesting, the last time we met as a conference of people, 400 people in Baltimore in 2019, I called for a Scope 3 approach for biodiversity because so many companies are allowed, under the way biodiversity is looked at, to declare it as non-material, but have not the same luxury with climate. So we really do need to be pushing out the supply chains with that. And I guess, Naomi, is CRH looking at their supply chain?
Well, I suppose absolutely is the answer, yes. And it's for lots of different reasons to do with corporate social responsibility, sustainability, in terms of, the ethics, the, labor rights, human rights, social topics like that, plus the environmental topics, climate, biodiversity, resource efficiency, energy efficiency, all of those, and safety, and also when it comes to, say, ethical issues like, antitrust, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, and so on, to make sure that the companies that we're doing business with are, doing everything that they should be doing from that very broad corporate social responsibility kind of lens. So yeah, it's very, very important that people look along that whole supply chain. I think as well, in the SME space, just go back to the question maybe a little that could come up. As a consumer, I can see a lot of SMEs are, using their sustainability credentials to promote their products, and it might, in whatever you look at, your local artisan food shops or, garden centres, everything, that reputational issue, I think, holds true no matter what size your company is. And, for us, the investors, the employees, the customers are all hugely important. If it's an SME that might be family owned, the investment side of it is not that relevant, but the employees and the customer side of it and the community side of it remains hugely important. So I think the drivers might be slightly different for different companies depending on what exactly they do, what size they are, where they operate, and so on. But a lot of those drivers are going to be in common for businesses no matter what size of a business they are.
No, that's a very fair point, and the different facets of a business: consumers, employers, customers, vendors, and investors. And Eva, you just posted the SME Nature Hub into the chat.
Well, I posted the SME Climate Hub.
Climate Hub.
Yes. Well, it was a question to SME representatives on the line, because there is an attempt. So first of all, so there is a climate hub specifically for SMEs. Is there a need for a nature one? That would this resource be helpful? Question to the audience. But then what I wanted just to add is that, of course, basically most companies in the world are SMEs. We know that, and there are some things that, when we think about time to transform, the Vision 2050 WBCSD must read for everyone. By the way, you can see that many of those innovations and that transformation is driven by SMEs. Like, in a way, the big companies are the ones that can reach that at scale, but they all started with these disruptive solutions, and we need more and more of those. I think also with COVID, somehow some of the way of working in SMEs is even more adaptable. So SMEs are agile, dynamic, they're focused on where the needs are, and therefore we can learn a lot from SMEs also, is what I should say. SMEs are part of the journey, part of the business voice. And when we talk about leadership, we are not only talking about the big multinationals. Absolutely not. We need to hear from everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, we probably do need a nature hub. I misread an SME nature hub. That would be really great. So we are actually wrapping up. We're getting to the end of the panel. I first of all want to thank you all for this great conversation. I want to thank our attendees for listening to this conversation, but I want to let you all have a last word. You can make it as provocative as you like. or stay safe in our lanes. But you know, to Eva's point, we have 10 years to sort this mess out, and we really need to do a lot of work for nature. So I will actually start with Bill, if you have any last comments, and thank you so much for all of the information that you transmitted to us today. It's been really, really great. So Bill, from your point of view, what would you like to leave our attendees with?
Yeah, just one piece from our vision work, and I agree with Eva. It's a must read. We need to start business leaders from thinking about addressing nature loss to thinking about nature as regenerative in their business models.
That's a great point. I love it. Thank you very much, and thank you for its brevity. Naomi, I will go to you next. What are your last thoughts? Last thoughts, that sounds terrible. Last thoughts for this panel.
I think I'll go back to that 3% figure. Again, only 3% of the Earth's land ecosystems are in their intact state. And I think this decade of restoration, we can be ambitious and work together and expand those rare and pristine patches.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that, Naomi. So you really need to look at this morning's presentation about the bogs of Ireland, and you'll see the importance of those too. So Eva.
I'm going to be dramatic, not provocative, but dramatic. Oh, try to be theatrical. So as adults and human and members of the human race, the race is on now towards a nature positive, net zero and equitable world. So it is up to us. This is the race of our generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva. That was dramatic enough, and I do appreciate that. But I think all of your words were so wise. Restoration, regenerative approaches, systems approaches to how we live with nature, and it's up to us from now on. So thank you, Naomi, thank you, Bill, thank you, Eva, for a really great presentation and for giving us your time and your talents today. So I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.